exactly an experienced painter, but I want to be. And obviously I've dabbled in the past, but in an effort to be more intentional, I'm going to direct that effort into painting more. Let me take you along on that process. Today I'll be using this 11 by 14 canvas. Once I get it out of its plastic prison, that's better. I actually have a bunch of cheaper canvases, but I have no idea what brand they are, so I figured I'd use this one, you know, because it has a label on it just for you. A canvas isn't a painting unless you add, say it with me, paint. I'll be using Liquitex Basics Acrylic. I love that they come in big tubes for pretty reasonable prices, and I have not regretted the splurge. The colors I have and I will be using for this painting are Cadmium Yellow Light Hue, Ultramarine Blue, Cadmium Red Light Hue, Bright Aqua Green, Quinacridone Magenta. I love this color. I honestly would recommend buying a bigger tube of this if you're anything like me and you like purple. But they were sold out of the bigger tube at the time. Sadness. Although I haven't finished this tube, so there really isn't a problem here. Also, Burnt Umber, and since I don't own a black hue, I will be adding in a little bit of whole bean acrylic gouache in jet black. This is just to help create some subtle desaturation if I need to, and hopefully Google isn't lying about me being able to use this with my acrylics. But I think we'll be fine. As for white, I have this. It's Golden Titanium White. This is actually a fluid acrylic, which is different from the other ones because it's just really runny. Juicy. But I actually find that rather useful in thinning out the paints. If you needed like to paint solid white, it's not all that handy. You kind of have to layer it up. So that's the color palette I'll be working with. As for where I got the colors, I kind of put it together after doing a bit of research on the internet, seeing what works for other people, and yeah, it hasn't done me dirty yet. For paintbrushes, I'll just be using them out of this bucket. It's kind of a Mod Podge. But, you know, isn't it pretty? It used to be an old oatmeal container and I painted it this pretty blueberry color. I digress. If my oldie moldy brushes aren't cutting it, I do have another container, also blueberry, if I need any more precision, I guess. We'll also be needing water. I've got a dirty cup and a clean cup. Obviously, they are both disgusting, as you may have noticed. But what I mean is that it has to do with when and how I will be using these cups. My dirty cup actually has a paint puck inside, and it's honestly a life-changing tool if you have paintbrushes. Totally recommend. But I guess I also need like a place to mix these paints. I'll be using this palette, or should I say the glass insert for my second grade class photos picture frame? She's doing better work now. I really like using glass because you get to peel the paint when it gets thick. So satisfying. It's kind of appealing, would you say? I wonder if I could like find a way to actually display this. To mix the paints, I'm going to try my best to use this palette knife. I usually end up using my brushes and then I like get super thick and stuck in the bristles, and it's honestly like a total hassle, especially if you want to get any kind of precise lines, but I just keep resorting back to that. But hey, I'm really gonna try my best today. Let's keep each other accountable. I also gathered my easel, but I didn't end up using this, so I'm not sure why I'm showing you. Hey, okay, yeah. Bye, Julian. When I put the canvas down on my desk, I realized that the staples used to hold this particular canvas together were rather robust, I guess, and I was terrified it was gonna scratch up my desk. Copic marker on my desk, yeah, I'll clean it. Ink, I'll just scrub a little harder. Paint, pff, that's easy. Gouges in the veneer, no, I have no time for that, no patience. No. So I will be protecting my desk with this brown paper Amazon used an eon ago to package something dumb I probably didn't actually need, but ordered anyway. At this point, it's time to start painting. Woo! But not quite as fun as you might think. Boo. First, I'm gonna add a base mid-tone to the entire canvas. This kind of stops any white specks from showing through when I'm done with the painting. So I basically just mix burnt umber and like a plethora of the titanium white with my palette knife. I actually used my palette knife. Impressive. I essentially just coat the whole thing in this beautiful chocolate ice cream color, and I use this 2-inch paintbrush. Essentially, the larger the brush, the less chance of like a stroke texture showing through on your final painting. So that's why I brought out the big boy. I still needed to figure out at this point what exactly it was that I was going to paint. So while it was drying, I hopped over onto Pexel.com. It's actually something new that I found. And I found this interesting photo. I think it's a photo by JJ Jordan, which instantly attracted me. And I couldn't really say why. Okay, fine, it was the subject matter, obviously. I have a thing for flying waffles, something I deal with on a day-to-day basis. We'll get through it. In Photoshop, I changed the background color to something more interesting for me, and I also removed the fork and cropped the composition. And at this point, I was very eager to start painting, as I imagine you are to see me start painting. Starting again with the burnt umber, and I think it's a flat, maybe it's like an angle brush. I started sketching on the canvas, and if the paint wasn't like spreading as evenly as I wanted, I would just add a little bit of water. I used little squares for the blackberries and the raspberries, and I used solid circles for the blueberries. The waffle section needed help, but it does the job of figuring out where everything's gonna go. It's like a cross section squares, I don't know. I did end up filling in the little like syrup holders to try and differentiate them from like the ridges. Once the sketch was complete, I guess we can call it that, the next step was to start adding in the colors. I laid out my palette, starting with my red, and then my magenta, and then the blue, and the yellow, and I mixed the red and the magenta together, adding in a tad bit of burnt umber to deepen up the tone, just to try and find that base raspberry color. I did switch to a larger flat brush, and then I just kind of colored them all in. At first, I kind of just kept them squares, thinking I could use like the background color to chisel out the shape, because that was going to be like the green teal color. I decided that was kind of stupid, so I ended up rounding them off to look more like the real life raspberry counterparts. Next, I mixed the blueberry color. You'll notice these first layers are all really dark. That's just what I have found in my little painting experience that works pretty well for me, because then later I can add in highlights and midtones and sometimes even darker shadows on top of it, depending on what I need. If I start too light, I end up adding in shadows and then things start looking flatter. Whereas if I start too dark, I only add in highlights and then it kind of just looks more metallic when the subject matter isn't necessarily a metallic object. So I like to just start on the deeper end of the spectrum, but not obviously the darkest it can go. I think that makes sense. And then I gave some of the little blueberries some spiky hair to better, I don't know, make them look like blueberries, because that's what blueberries look like. And then I also used that same color to add a base tone for the blackberries. And then I mixed in a tad of my like base raspberry color to create shadows on the raspberries. So it's like mixing the blackberry with the raspberry color. And then I created even deeper shadows. I feel like this was really important because they're so clustered together and I wanted them to, you know, stand out as individual fruits. Now, this probably wouldn't have been the next step looking back in hindsight, but here's where I mixed my yellow and my white paints together to create a base tone for the cream, which I think, looking at the reference, is supposed to be yogurt, but mine ended up looking more like whipped cream, which I'm not complaining. I layered this just anywhere it looked good, obviously taking the reference into consideration, but since I didn't sketch it in the original sketching process, layering it down was kind of a sketch in itself, so it ended up looking sketchy. It kind of got in the way when I was trying to paint in the waffle later, so like I said, this was a bit of a regret, but look how it pops. That's why I did it. You gotta love the contrast. Now, next, I set out to create a waffle color. This ended up being the most difficult task, I think, of the entire painting. Not to mention actually trying to just paint the waffle. I love globbing on paint, so I'm not complaining, but I paint over this puppy a lot. I used a deeper tone for inside the waffle, like little syrup indentations, and then like a much lighter version with a tad more yellow for the ridges. And then I just tweaked it a lot. Mixed some more colors, add them in, hoping the waffle would just like start to look like the reference. Watching this back now, I kind of liked some of these earlier renditions because of their like, I don't know, they're like simple. But I really tried to work this. I wanted to make it look as much like the reference as possible. So I kind of overwork it. You'll see as we continue. Not entirely sure how to explain this in a way that makes sense. But I think the hardest part was just trying to capture like the physical shape of the waffle. I mean, sure, it has the ridges and the indents like I already mentioned, but there's obviously more to it than that. There are like shadows within the indents, and it's more rounded than like most of my so far attempts have looked. When I like finally realized that fact, I tried using different variations of color to try and sort of denote it. I specifically remember using pink at one point, but I don't think it looked that great at the time, so then I like colored it all in flat again. Every time it felt really off, I would just layer it like a flat, bright color over the ridges and then a darker version in the indents to just give myself a new place to start from, like going back to the beginning. At one point I tried making it oranger, didn't really like that. I tried adding shadows to the top left of all of the indents, which worked, but then it made all the indents kind of like too dark. I added some yellow to the inside of the indents, but it kind of just ended up too similar to the ridges. So I kind of just layered over all that with something more orange, but then the hue was just like too dissimilar to the ridges. Do you recognize the struggle? Looking back now, I can see that I just kept overcompensating. This was due in large part to the fact that when I tried to be subtle, I was like way too subtle to the point where you couldn't actually see a difference. So then I'd try to make it more obvious, and well, that's how we got here. I do really like the way it looks here, but the hues are just all wrong. I like the tones and how some areas are brighter than others, but really, like I said, the colors are just way off, so I obviously didn't leave it like this either. I did add a little crack into the ridges to better represent the reference and to just make the waffle look less uniform and, I don't know, more like the crackly, buttery, flaky, delicious pastry that has beautiful flaws. Now that I've gone over the waffle again, you can kind of see it looks a lot less orangey or yellow. It's now kind of like the color of a manila folder. Still not ideal, but an improvement from the carrot leg color it was before. Then this is where I tried to bevel out the ridges so that they didn't look so, I don't know, stark next to the indents. To do this, I just mixed a lighter version and only painted along the centermost part of the ridges to kind of make it look like they were kind of curving into all of the indents. I also lightened up a smidge like the inside of the indent and added a shadow to the top left of the indents, this time using like a slightly bluish purple shade. This is kind of my favorite way that it looks, but I confess, I changed it and basically threw that away. So now we're back to the way it was before. So at this point, I decided to take a break from the waffle and I moved into the berries, which, I don't know, I was under some delusion would be easier. I wasn't entirely wrong, but like, I mean, I still got a lot to learn, okay? I mixed a lighter red color and I kind of just added blobby highlights to the raspberries to sort of denote any place that would be like receiving more light, or more light would be bouncing off of it, I guess, and just to create more of that 3D shape. Some places I did like sort of patchy lines to show the texture of the raspberry better, like that top center one specifically. Then I did the same thing with the blackberry, mixing a lighter blue tone and creating that blackberry texture. It's kind of like a very impressionist sort of, I don't know, abstract way. I might be using those terms incorrectly. I'm just trying to keep it simple and focus on the overall shape instead of distinct details. Then I moved into the blueberries. Since they are rounded, the highlights I add are also rounded. And I tried to blend out the highlights more since I want them to look, you know, like the little balls that blueberries are. On a couple of them, I like re-added the darker blueberry color to the center to look like that little I have no idea what those things are called. They're like the little part of the blueberry that doesn't look like the rest of the blueberry. Okay, happy. I just googled anatomy of a blueberry. It's called, well, it can either be called like the blossom end or a calyx. I'll bet a lot of you just learned something new. Whereas like the nerds are just nodding in agreement. I also took the time here to add way more of the spiky hair bits, but to some of the other blueberries, because I like that part so much. But I guess now that I'm an expert, I should call them, what, the blossom end, the calyx. I think I like spiky hair better though. Then I mixed some of the blueberry color in with whatever waffle color hadn't dried up yet on the palette, and I filled in the syrup holders before ultimately layering a yellow color on top, and then an orange color. I'm extremely indecisive, clearly. I took a very light color and just marked the edges of the waffle that I wanted to like show. This is like the inside of the waffle, I guess. So like the waffle's broken so you can kind of see the center of the waffle. I kind of just did this so that I wouldn't forget about it later. Here you go. Tip of the day. If you ever need to do something on a painting and you're worried you'll forget, just make that part look way worse. And then you won't be able to walk away from the painting without fixing it. And thus you won't forget. This has been the tip of the day. I used that same color to begin to shade the dollop of cream at the bottom of the painting. And then I added more white to that color to start adding in like brighter highlights, not only to that, but like all of the cream, and also changing up the shape of it in some areas. I tried to add highlight to one of the raspberries with this, but it was excessive. So I mixed more red into it and covered over that, which is also too much. Then I tried to use that same color on some of the other raspberries, hoping it would kind of tie it all together and not look so out there. I don't know. But no. So I added more red to that color on the palette and a bit of blue, and I covered over most of that to just tone it down. Then I moved back to the dollop and added more highlights to really, I don't know, find the shape, and now it is looking much better. While I had the white on my paintbrush, I also added more cream to the waffle because, I think I mentioned this already, I really like the way the cream looks and just the way it pops on the painting. I'm simple, I'm easy to please. Stark white on a canvas of other colors, yes please. I also tried my luck adding much smaller amounts of white highlights to the raspberries, which I think will be much better received. I went back to the dark bluish purple to add more shading to the raspberries and find more of that like raspberry detail with, you know, or without overworking it. And this was kind of what we were working with at this point. I was getting a little tired of reworking the waffle over and over again, so I decided it was as good a time as any to add in the background. I took the teal color straight from the tube and I mixed it with a small amount of the jet black acrylic gouache. I was trying to be cautious and I mixed like a large amount of the color so that I wouldn't run out of paint and I'd be able to paint over the entire background without having like, you know, those patches of like a newly mixed version, which is always sloppy. Because at this point I thought the background was going to be just flat teal. I used a really big paintbrush. I started filling in the background. I honestly enjoy filling in flat areas of color, like adding that burnt umber color at the very beginning. There's just something so calming about painting and feeling the bristles move under the wrist and not having to worry about, you know, making it actually look like anything. However, I couldn't take it too easy. I didn't want to like paint over all that hard work I'd put in, so I did switch to a smaller paintbrush around like the smaller areas to get more precision, to make sure I didn't, you know, paint over a blueberry or something. Alright, now we just gotta fill in that teeny tiny bit, and that's it. That's the background done, I thought. Well, I mean, I also colored the edges of the canvas. I'm not a slob. I feel like I could have walked away at this point, but I don't know, the whipped cream was calling me, so I threw some more white onto my palette and I just kind of followed that calling. I let it take me where I wanted to go. I also took some of the jet black and tried to add a shadow underneath the waffle, but quite quickly decided that that was the worst decision ever and tried to hide it and any evidence that it ever happened. Thinking I was done at this point, I started cleaning off my paintbrushes before, you know, they could get the chance to harden. Paintbrushes are not a metapod. They don't become beautiful butterflies at the end if you let them crystallize. And I'm pretty impressed that I only got a tad bit of paint on my arms. Not a bad day. I did end up grabbing my white Posca pen to sign my name on the painting, you know, kind of still operating under the impression that I was done. But then I thought I could use this for some teeny tiny highlights, so I did do that. I kind of like how it looks specifically on like the blueberry and makes that calyx pop more, or like the blossom end. See, I'm still not sure what I'm supposed to call it. And I Googled it. So here, this is where I showed it off to the camera, thinking I was done. Are you sensing a theme? Essentially, the whole thing just kind of felt too dull, and I had two options. Either paint over the entire waffle and the fruit to brighten it up, which I had no desire to do, or add more saturation to the background. I chose the background. So I grabbed some teal straight from the tube, this time without mixing it with any of the jet black, and I started blobbing it onto the background, focusing mostly in the center and fading it out as I reached the outside. I love how this made the blueberries pop, but I do think it kind of competes too much with the waffle. I totally didn't even think about how making the background more saturated would cause the fruit and the waffles to look less saturated, but I think in the long run, I do like it better this way. I still have like a lot to learn, and I want to keep pushing myself to paint more so that I actually have that opportunity to learn more. I think on my next painting, I'm going to try, I don't know, less busy subject matter so I can focus more on mixing colors and trying to like recreate a color from a reference, because I think that's the part that's bothering me the most and what I want to improve upon. But we'll see, you never know. I don't make promises here. Art is a creative hobby, and sometimes you can't explain what, when, where, why, or how, so I'll just leave it there. Thanks for watching. Hope you all have a delicious evening full of waffles. I'll see you guys all next week. Bye!